shocking story. New mothers are being given drugs at hospitals only to find themselves reported to child abuse authorities for being on those very drugs. A recent report in USA Today reveals hospitals across the country are administering medications to patients in labor only to then alert child welfare authorities when their newborns test positive for those very same substances on subsequent drug tests. The Marshall Project investigated and found that the people implicated contained traces of the drugs given to them by hospital personnel, nurses, at times without their knowledge. Medications including fentanyl and morphine used in epidurals, plus different blood pressure medicines given for C-sections.
Surveillance and criminalisation of pregnant women has increased since the overturning of Roe v. Wade in June 2022. As a result, hospital reports have led to police calls, child welfare investigations, and even the removal of children from their parents. One such case in Oklahoma that the Marshall Project uncovered found that a woman had her newborn baby and 3 other children removed and put into foster care for 2 weeks. She had tested positive for meth, but it turned out that it was heartburn meds that the hospital administered that was the source of that substance. She was ultimately reunited with her kids.
Yeah, I don't know about that. The only thing there I would disagree with is the uptick versus after Roe v. Wade. I mean, maybe, but I have read tons and tons of these cases over the year. At Reason Magazine, where I also work, Lenore Skenazy is a writer there who I work with very closely over the years. She's a good friend of mine. She is the free-range kids person. She wrote a book about that movement, about why kids need more unstructured free time, playtime outside. But she also writes a lot about child services investigations, because often there are cases like that where child services is brought in because someone saw a kid walk into the park by himself and called the authorities, and it's just utterly ridiculous. When I was young, when you were young, it was common to provide kids, healthy to provide the kids this level of unsupervised time. We've totally criminalized this. It's bad for society, bad for the kids, bad for our police resources, and so on and so forth. There are also cases just like this at hospitals where parents either bring in very young children for routine medical issues or for important medical issues, where sometimes it's not even doctors doing it. It's just there's a child abuse specialist at the hospital who will say, "Oh, this looks like abuse," even if that's just being totally made up. Even if sometimes it's abuse introduced by the hospital staff if they have to perform an important on a very young baby's body. You can, if you have to intubate them or do things like that, you can introduce bruises. It's sad, but it happens even in the course of important medical work being done. For then, the child abuse people to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, the parents must have done this," and they get the baby yanked away at the hospital. It happens all the time. It's terrible. It's a scandal. Because also and then they'll take the other kids. If there's older kids, they'll put them in foster care too. You have to have a pretty actually violent and abusive family life for foster care to be an improvement. Mm-hmm. I will say that.
Yeah, no.
It is being split from your family and your siblings and placed in foster care. It has to be insanely bad for you for that to be a healthier alternative. But in a lot of cases, there's no abuse. It's just imagined by child welfare bureaucrats.
I mean, I just think the nature of such an intimate and personal issue is that there is an enormous propensity for injustice by wrongs on either side. There is obviously to have one's children taken away on the basis of a false allegation of abuse or neglect is obviously catastrophic and totally traumatic, and people who that happens to should seek redress. I assume that some of these measures have grown out of the historic missing of cases of genuine abuse. Certainly, you were talking about when we were young, different mores applying, and certainly the amount of abuse that was swept under the carpet when I was young and later came to light decades later is equally tragic and a terrible injustice to the children who suffered that. In this particular case, and obviously we do have to say we are two men sitting here discussing pregnancy and the complications of pregnancy and the medications that go with pregnancy.
I was born once.
Well, yes, that's a good start. You're an expert in this from the day you were born. But some of these cases, we mentioned the one in Oklahoma, a lot of them do seem terrible. In New York, according to the Marshall Project, a mother with no history of drug abuse lost custody of her toddler and newborn for 5 months after she tested positive for fentanyl that the hospital had given her in an epidural. So these things are awful, terrible thing that has befallen these
It's like
families.
you eat a poppy seed bagel,
Yeah.
a muffin, and you have opium.
It's all those kind of things are genuine issues. Now, I mean, I guess the Marshall Project is not alleging any nefarious or malevolent intent, but the fact that there are all these substances present in conventional medicines, some of them that are given to pregnant women or to women in the very first days of becoming a mother, that have substances that are in another light can be cast as illicit drug use. That seems obviously a problem, and it seems like something that has to be addressed.
Yeah, I'm looking up Lenore Skenazy's archive. She had several recent stories for us at Reason that were just crazy on this front. An Illinois family, the Brucker family, they had medical complications with their young twins, and so they brought them to the hospital, and they're being treated at the hospital, and then because the X-rays showed that they had problems. That's why they brought them in, and they were just wrongly blamed for I think fractured ribs that were clearly a result of what the doctors were performing on them there. And Child Services came. They took the kids away, and then like a year later made the determination, you're correct, you did not abuse your child. They got the kids back. And the parents their obvious question, well, who did abuse them then? So there was someone at this hospital, some nurse who handled the kid too aggressively. And Child Service said, well, we did substantiate, like in their investigation, they found out who that was, but they just wouldn't tell them. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that appalling?
That's insane.
It's that kind of thing that's just insane.
Yeah.
This was Illinois. I've also seen a lot of cases out of Texas for some reason. You would think Texas would be a state where we firmly assert parents' rights to take care of their kids. No, the Department of Family Services there, or whatever it's called something slightly different in every state.
Yeah.
It's just reprehensible there.
In the case that you mentioned in Illinois, I mean, there is the fundamental cruelty of taking the kids away, but then, correct me if I'm wrong, you said the kids were only given back to the parents after a year.
It's like a year.
So, I mean, I can't imagine being a kid and being taken away from my parents.
Well, what happens is eventually you work out, you go into foster care immediately, then you work out an arrangement where you're going to live with an aunt or grandma and grandpa, and then your parents can visit you if supervised for a certain amount of time per week, which is just really a humiliating ordeal to go through. You're the parent being told you can only see your children under XYZ circumstances. It's really bad.
Well, also really just terribly traumatic for the child, presumably, who just has the bond with his or her parents ripped away and dismantled in large extent for no good reason at all.
Indeed. No. Well, tell us what you think about this story, or if you've heard of similar examples in the news, and we'll be back with more Rising right after this.